Hi, welcome back to CS170. We're on week 8, still processing on loops right now. So the last lecture I left you off with, we finished off this example for loops. Remember the for loop, you have the initialization, you have the test or the comparison, and then you have the incrementer. Right? These are the three key parts for the for loop that you want to pay attention to. And then as you iterate through, you have a number of statements, one statement or multiple statements that you'll execute on. Okay, and I come back to here. This whole concept here is pretty important to remember. It's a very common flow or construct to do loops. Okay, so I won't repeat this. I covered this in the last lecture, but you can see this. Ideally, you should prepare, let's say we were going to cover this on the exam. Make sure you have a clear idea what each of these things map to within a for loop, right? So you should be able to draw a for loop and be able to map each of these parts to the for loop, okay? All right, let's come back to here. All right, so now this one, really the main thing here is this part, right? So the for loop is just like what we talked about, but you can see we've done the text up here, and you're basically going to loop through it 3 times, and it's going to keep on appending to the string with drip, right? But this idea of doing concatenation on strings is not a new concept. You've been doing this before in other work or earlier lectures. But I went ahead and put this onto js.do just to run it quickly. So I'm going to just take this out for a second and run this, and you can see leaky faucet, drip, 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 all night long. Okay, so let's close this guy here, come back to here. I'm going to put this back in here. I'm going to come to this in a second. Okay. Now this part, you're going to be doing some math. And I did a little bit of different variation of this in my example, and I'll come to that in a second. But basically, same thing with the for structure, and then you're doing an answer with the addition, right? So it's just a slight variation of what we just did with concatenation with the string. Okay, I'll leave that to you if you want to do that on your own. It should be a quick thing for you to do. I mentioned this in one of my other videos. So this is a standard one that you see a lot of new people doing the for loops to do. Some of the other people that have been doing for loops a while, it may be a quick shortcut would be to do something like this, and I think I alluded to that before. J++ or J plus equals 1. They both do the same thing. They're adding +1 each time. Okay. So for this class, it doesn't really matter. You can do whichever one you like. That's just a choice, right? Perfectly fine if you just do j equals to j plus 1. I alluded to this before in another lecture too, where a lot of times you see it going like starting off with a 1 and then it just kind of increments +1 to a certain number, right? So that's pretty common. But just know you can do other things like this. So you can have this -5. I think I did an example in the other video where this part was a negative number or this was doing a minus. In this case, we do the initialization at a negative number. Okay, you can do fractional numbers, right? The computer doesn't care which way you do it. So you can do a step in terms of 0.5, right? So j equals to j plus 0.5, and you have this 0.5 here, and it'll just keep on incrementing. Okay, so all that type of stuff works as you might expect it to do. We talked about whether it has to increment in 1, and it doesn't, right? So your step size could be, in this case, a 5, right? J equals to j plus 5. And you can go negative, like I demonstrated before, where you're going to have, let's say, 5, and it goes -1 down to 0. Okay? Let's see this. All right, well, so infinite loops are not desirable, right? And it's very easy to create an infinite loop um, if you mess up something in here. So let's say for the sake of argument I did a typo and I didn't put a j here. Maybe I use another variable like x or something like that. Um, then obviously no matter how many times I loop through this j can keep on going up to infinity, and it will never pass this criteria. Okay, so or exit out from this criteria, right? Because I put an x in here instead of a j. Okay, um, so there's a lot of things that you can do to create infinite loop. Once it goes to infinite loop, you're kind of messed up. Um, so watch out for that. This is again a logic error, right? Syntactically, you can do this. You can put in a different variable. It doesn't have to be all j's in here. You can put any statement you want in these things, but you do that at your own risk. You could end up in a situation where you have an infinite loop. Okay, so here we're in a nested loop, right? And this is where it's similar to like the nested if statements or the if else statements, right? You see these open brackets here, right? And then you can do whatever you want in here, any statements. It just happens we do another for loop in here. So you have this other for loop in here and do this and this, okay? You want to make sure there's an important point here. You have to use different variables, right? All kinds of bad things will happen if you use the same variables, okay? So make sure you're using different variables here. Notice here in this example, they're doing the plus plus for the increment, right? Don't let that get you messed up or anything. Don't let it throw you off there. But do pay attention, right? These brackets, make sure it's inside, make sure that you have different variables, and don't let this plus plus throw you off, okay? And then in this case, they do a document right, which I'm gonna show you my example in a second. Let me take this out here. So you see here, I initialized the variable here. Now I set it to x equals 1 in the loop. Kind of doesn't matter, but I just like to do my initialization here. You can see like on the PowerPoint slide, the person chose to do like the var here to initialize it. That's fine too. Like I said in a past lecture, I prefer to set up my variables and potentially or usually initialize them here, and then do whatever I'm going to do down here. Okay, that's just a style preference from me. Now here's what I did here. X equals to 1, x is less than or equal to 12, x equals to x plus 1. So I'm going to loop through this, incrementing 12 times. And within that, for each of these, I'm going to do another for loop. This time is y. And that's also going to go to 12 times, y equals to y plus 1. Actually, if I think about it, what I'm going to be doing with this, I should have flipped this other way around. I should have the y's up here and the x down here. But, for the computer standpoint, it doesn't matter. And then I'm doing a right. And what I'm doing at the right here, I'm doing a little bit of math in here, right? So x times y, okay? So the way you should read this is that I created a blank space here, and then this plus is concatenating the result of x times y, okay? So I just do this to demonstrate the math part. So if you think about this, think about what this is going to create. You might be able to quickly come up with the idea that this is going to create a multiplication table, right? So x times y keeps on multiplying each time through the loop. And then after each row, after I've done 12 of these calculations, I want to do a carriage return and bring it back to the next line. So let's see what this looks like. And there you go. So as I work through this, this is why I said it should be a y. As I go through each of this, I go 12 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through 12. In this case, you can see I did 2 times 2, 3 times 2, so on and so forth, all the way through. Right? So if you want to do it by hand, just to kind of show what I just did on your own, just so you understand how these nested for loops work, you can do that. but this basically, I think, a pretty clear example of a for loop that's nested. Okay, you can make this into 3 dimensions. You can make this like a cube. You can put another for loop in here if you want. So you could be X, Y, and Z. Okay. Then really, I put this together pretty quickly, so I didn't do like, you know, tabbing to make this line up a little bit better. But you know, obviously you can play around with some formatting in here to line this up a little bit better. Okay, so for example, if you're gonna go out to three spaces here, you might allocate like 3 spaces across for each one. Okay, and then things will line up a little bit better. Okay. So these are this is an example of a for loop that's nested. Okay. Here, I just chose to use my example on that instead of these different examples that are on the slides here, but you can choose to put these in. Okay. So play around with it and see how these different things will come out to this, and just see if that helps you to get an idea of how these for loops can work, and you know, playing around with these different conditions. Okay, so I'll leave that for you for extra credit. All right, so play around with the for loops. Do the for loops like this with this nesting, and see if you can come up with different patterns. You can do stuff with strings, like we said before. You can do concatenation of strings. You can do some math things, like I did with this multiplication table. So play around with each of those concepts and see if you can get a good handle on that. Just send me your samples with your code and your output like this. Right, so here's all your code here on your left, and then your output is on your right. Okay, similar to like what you've already been doing for your other extra credits for me. If you can do that for me, that would be good. Another video lecture I'm going to come up is doing the arrays, and then I'll have a little bit of extra credit from that you can take a look at. Okay, with that, I'll leave you, and we'll come back next time with another video for arrays. Thank you.